Hi. I feel like I know so many of you. Thank you, Commager Committee, and to all of you who came here today to see me do something that I almost never, ever do, which is to come out from behind my computer to speak publicly. And after I do, you'll see why this is such a rarity. So I just want to make clear that I'm speaking for myself and not for the newspaper, which with I've been associated for so many decades, such a long part of my life. Although I've covered the Commager lectures for the Recorder, I haven't often seen or heard anyone incorporate the wisdom of Henry Steele Commager, who was an avid defender of the Constitution and the Bill of Rights, and an outspoken opponent of McCarthyism, Nixon's presidency, and the Vietnam War, which he called not only a war we cannot win, but a war we must lose if we're to survive morally. So I thought, maybe the 2017 Commager talk should take stock of the state of our democracy at a time when it seems under serious threat, and the role that the press can play in an age of alternative facts, fake news, and what our current president, not you, Bob, calls a dishonest news media. The press honestly is out of control, he said soon after taking office. The level of dishonesty is out of control. I turn on the TV, open the newspapers, and I see stories of chaos. Why doesn't he read the newspaper? Nearly 30 years ago, a Boston Globe story described Henry Steele Commager, an 85-year-old Amherst College professor with leonine white hair, black wool suit, in a clapboard house with a little peeling paint and full of rooms full of books, fiery and outspoken. He criticizes, quote, the general bankruptcy of politics, the bankruptcy of the presidency, the bankruptcy of Congress, criticizing Nixon and Reagan as, quote, the two worst presidents in American history. Commager adds, these are what television may give us as presidents of the future. We tolerate the degradation and almost the humiliation of subjecting our political leaders to trivia. And we are bombarded with trivia. Almost all the interrogations are trivia, he says, and candidates depend on television for their notoriety, depend on television for everything. So I ask myself, at a time like this, what would Henry say? First, I'd like to share with you my own experience here on the ground at a small newspaper where, thank heaven, we don't cover national politics. Leave that to the Associated Press. We're focused instead on Franklin County. Marking our 225th anniversary this year, we were born 3 years after the nation was founded, and 19 years before there even was a Franklin County. We're now facing a time when many newspapers face existential threats, given vast changes in how people get their news and the future of what we today call readership. Daily U.S. newspaper circulation, according to Pew Research estimates, is now below 35 million, lower than circulation figures going back earlier than 1940. Ad revenue is below what it was in 1983 or since, and it's 37% of its 2005 peak. When I was studying journalism and political science at the State University of New York, the credibility gap was how we summarized the discrepancy between what Washington was telling us about the Vietnam War and what we were reading and seeing in press accounts. In those days, leading up to Watergate, President Nixon was telling the White House staff, the press is the enemy, and Vice President Spiro Agnew attacked reporters as nattering nabobs of negativism and a small, unelected elite. Commager, in The Defeat of America, wrote, "Never before in our own history has government employed so many methods for manipulating and distorting the truth. Corruption of language is a special form of deception, which his administration has brought to a high point of perfection. Bombing is protective reaction. Precision bombing is surgical strikes. Concentration camps are pacification centers or refugee camps. Bombs dropped outside the target area are incontinent ordnance, and those dropped on a South Vietnam village are excused as friendly fire." How sobering that 15 years before 1984, our own government should invent a doublethink as dishonest as that imagined by Orwell. After coverage of Watergate, enrollment swelled in journalism schools, and I was already intent on newspaper writing. I'd grown up in New York, where my father would bring home every day's World Telegram and Sun and the New York Post, with Pete Hamill as a favorite of mine. And we'd get Newsday as well as the Sunday Times, and I was inspired then by the writing of Times columnist Russell Baker and Tom Wicker. Right out of college, I began reporting for a chain of suburban weeklies, and after 2 years, a farm vacation in Shelburne, her place, of all places, landed me here. That's Marion Fisk from Zero Fisk Road. The Renaissance community was still around in 1976, as were plans for twin nuclear reactors on the Montague Plains. I remember covering a county commission election that fall where Randy Keeler was a candidate for county commissioner. The Recorder had only stopped printing with lead type about a decade earlier, about the same time that Interstate 91 came through, and Greenfield Community College had gotten started. The Vermont Yankee plant and Northfield Mountain were 4 years old when I showed up. Greenfield still had something of a thriving downtown with Knapp's hardware store, 2 downtown pharmacies, Carl's restaurant boasting a trifle for a trifle, Peggy Parker, Ann August, Bartlett's, and factories hummed. Miller's Falls Company, Greenfield Tap and Die, Wells Tool, Channing Beat, all locally owned. They still employed hundreds of workers who still spent their money downtown. Because the closest real mall was 50 miles away in Connecticut, the same bustle was true in Turner's Falls, in Miller's Falls, Shelburne Falls, Orange, to a lesser extent. And here I found that kids really do go fishing and skating nearby for fun. And many did farm chores. Everyone seemed to garden. This is heaven, I thought. And I got to write about it through fresh eyes and convey how special it was. And it's still special, even though the entertainment and online media convey that the special stuff is far off in some distant virtual reality. Part of what I've always loved about Franklin County is that lots of people, like Juanita, have seemed engaged on the front lines of all sorts of real issues, whether it's fighting sprawl and climate change on the town common, discussing pressing issues on the town meeting floor, or organizing and doing stuff for the community through countless clubs. Quality of life here seems to be a true dimension rather than an empty phrase, and many of us seem to choose it over the quantity of life we might find elsewhere. And like my friends at Double Edge Theater, I truly believe that the added spirit of creativity here is an outgrowth of our open town meeting form of government's annual lesson in the value of informed debate and democracy. That, I believe, is a true sense of community, which this woman, Marie Jones, represents, which seems all the more palpable when we climb Poetsy Tower. There's the church, there's the hospital, there's the school, the community college, all on a scale that's easy to connect with, which is part of the reason why I left working at the Springfield newspapers. I didn't find that there. Road names harken back to the people who settled this place, and the sense of history runs deep, still. And so, at this little newspaper, where when I arrived, we almost all wrote on manual typewriters, except Marie, who had an electric typewriter, but here she is on her computer. And we cut and pasted our stories using real scissors and real paste, with the constant clatter of the AP teletype. I found myself covering West County, nuclear power, and a project to divert the Connecticut River water to Boston, as well as state and county government. You might think that after 2 or 20, 30 years, this job would get old. And it might have, except for my growing love for this place, where I only expected to stay a couple of years in the beginning. Not just the place, but what I found people doing here. Old Yankees who had a real love of this land, and young transplants like myself who respected living traditions like contra dancing, quilting, farming, and who questioned the need for mega projects like diverting the river, or a 4-lane highway through Wendell, or the push by Boston to kill our county government, which seemed a real need here. And we reported on building the local economy with industrial parks, a commercial kitchen, CISA, and more. The beauty of a small newspaper, I have found, was in giving voice to people who seem to be passionate about what they're doing, whether they're positive actions for the people around here or simply in how we live life. Day after day, we've reported on what makes Franklin County tick, whether it's the changing character of downtown or whether Congressman Richie Neal is showing up in his Franklin County towns, or whether electric utilities are making it harder or easier for customers to install renewable technologies, or whether a state legislator is working a full-time job on the side. The role of a local newspaper is to bring the community together around ongoing truths. Yet today, I believe our democracy is being threatened on many fronts. The growing disparity of wealth, combined with the enormous influence of money on our political system. There's our extreme social and political polarization, and an anger-driven attempt for what Thomas Edsall calls the wrecking crew, to dismantle programs that were set up for the common good. And then there's that other threat, the weakening of a vigilant press to keep in check the 3 branches of government. So let's look at these threats. Number 1, I'm sure it comes as no surprise to anyone here that billions of dollars, much of it from the wealthiest people and corporations in this country, are being spent to influence the political system, and they do it. And much of the flood of cash spurred by Supreme Court decisions 8 years ago are from donors hidden from us. There's also the recent threat of foreign influence on our elections, but that's another story. In the 2016 election, dark money spending totaled over $43 million for president, with another $40 million in the top 6 Senate races, according to the Center for Responsive Politics. That's just the dark money. Quote, when there were limits on how much a single donor could give, it was much harder for an individual to have a decisive impact, Trevor Potter of the nonpartisan Campaign Legal Center said in a Jane Mayer article about billionaire Robert Mercer, who's funneled millions of dollars to Donald Trump and Steve Bannon. Now, a single billionaire can write an 8-figure check and put not just their thumb, but their whole hand on the scale. And we often have no idea who they are. Suddenly, a random billionaire can change politics and public policy to sweep everything else off the table, even if they don't speak publicly, and even if there's almost no public awareness of his or her views. Number 2, there's the growing concentration of media ownership, already seen as a problem in the early 1980s when Ben Begdickian found the majority of media in this country were owned by just 50 corporations. Today, according to the watchdog group Free Press, fewer than 6 corporations control 90% of media. That's scary. Consolidation has the effect of squelching local reporting in favor of syndicated reports dictated by corporations far from afar. And while there are certainly more voices being heard today in the media over cable channels and an array of blogs and other sources on the internet, confusion abounds over what's news versus opinion versus ads versus outright propaganda. And here's where I want to make clear my disdain for the term media, because of the blurring of the lines between news and entertainment and social media. When we choose a reality show celebrity for president, when we believe we're getting the real news by reading a blog or listening to a talk jock rail on, or by learning our history from watching biopics, it seems to me we have problems, and we have problems. A frightening case in point: the proposed $3.9 billion merger of Sinclair Broadcasting Group and Tribune Media, which now seems headed for FCC approval. Ultra-conservative Sinclair already operates more than 170 local television stations, and Tribune owns 42 television stations, including in some large markets like New York, LA, and Chicago. By buying Tribune, Sinclair would own more than 200 stations and will be able to broadcast its Fox-like news through local channels that reach some 70% of the country. That, to me, seems like an entirely doing away with the fox, doing away with the hen house. So good night and good luck. I'd be remiss in ignoring, or by not pointing out, that newspapers have had a partisan history, a time when they were strongly aligned with one political party or another, in fact, serving as unabashed extensions of party politics on the local level. And we only have to look at Springfield Republican, or in my old stomping ground, the Democrat and Chronicle in Rochester, to recall that history. But those were the days when newspapers flourished enough that there was competition among them. Overall, 45% of us get our news from Facebook, Pew reported in August, and 67% get news from social media. News content was once determined by editors with some journalistic training, like Tim Blagg over there, and perhaps professional journalistic integrity. But social media content, a term I'm also wary of as it slithers into my news world, is often determined by logarithms. TV news outlets also determine content based on what audiences want to see. And I guess that all news outlets, now armed with analytic tools that are today's version of the applausometer over your head, pay more attention now to how many hits a story is generated than how worthwhile it is. That's a change from the traditional, though subjective, journalistic standards of what is news. And as we know, Facebook and Google were infiltrated by Russian agents during the last election, trying to spread disinformation, exploit divisions, damage public trust in our electoral system, and weaken our democracy. But at the same time, these online search engines and social networks / news sources thrive on data collection about you and me. Our likes, our so-called friends and groups we associate with. Cambridge Analytica, principally owned by that same Robert Mercer, builds psychographic profiles for political campaigns like Donald Trump's. It used Facebook data gathered by Amazon's crowdsourcing marketplace for buying and selling human intelligence Is that an oxymoron? For a buck, Amazon's Mechanical Turk users took personality questionnaires, allowing access to their Facebook profiles. Cambridge Analytica has also been linked to the Brexit campaign and to Trump advisor Michael Flynn, and is also part of the probe into Russian involvement to favor the Trump campaign. So think about that before you like anything or play any Facebook games. Then, too, there's the insidious social media looping effect with quote-unquote news that's not only determined by logarithms, but works to reinforce what you already believe. Social media's self-affirming feedback loop, writes George Will, encourages expectations for a custom-made reality and indignation about anything that deviates from our preferences. We're also living in a time of an ego-driven president with reality show resume who sets up his own Trump TV network and has a Twitter following of 40 million and has relentlessly assaulted the news media for its fake coverage. All of which deliberately plays into what seems a major threat to our democracy, extreme polarization, which to me begins to smell just a little bit like the dangerous racial and ethnic conflicts we've seen for so long around the world. Extreme polarization discourages consensus, a building block of democracy, and it's contagious within the society. A Pew Research poll in July found that 47% of liberal Democrats, nearly half, say if a friend supported Trump, it would actually strain their friendship. Pew last year found that 47% of Clinton supporters didn't have any close friends who were Trump supporters. Pew studies over the years have found a widening gap between those who define themselves on the extremes. One showed a 5-fold jump between 1994 and last year in Democrats who say they have consistent liberal views, jumping from 5% in 1994 to 27% last year. Could this be as a result of wedge-driving talk show hosts and so-called news stations that inflame rather than inform? Those partisan differences spill over into trust or distrust of institutions. Sometimes I identify with this guy, like national news media. As a Pew study in July found, 85% of Republicans, 46% of Democrats said the national news media have a negative effect on the way things are going in this country. When it comes to getting news about politics and government, liberals and conservatives inhabit different worlds, said Pew back in 2014. A Pew survey released this month shows the partisan divide on key issues has more than doubled, from 15 points to 36 points between 1994 and today. And the share of Democrats and Republicans who each have unfavorable things to say about the other party has more than doubled since 1994. Is there any wonder then that depending on which camps we're in, these radically divergent groups can hold entirely conflicting beliefs about what's true? As journalists, we understand that there'll always be a variety of valid opinions and different approaches to addressing issues we face, and we try to convey them to help people understand issues with the assumptions that they want to hear them. Driving the polarizing wedge further is a key tactic of the man 66% of Americans, according to a recent Washington Post ABC poll, called the most divisive president in history. How many of you would agree? Fair amount. He does this chiefly by attacking the other, be they Mexicans, Muslims, Puerto Ricans, or the fake news media, referring to reporters after his inauguration as among the most dishonest people on earth, with immediate applause from his supporters. Remember the tweeting of a doctored video of himself pummeling a CNN meme? Commager, in the Nixon era, wrote, "Even more dangerous than secrecy and deception is the deliberate effort of the administration to intimidate the press and the television networks." New York Times columnist Charles Blow wrote recently, "It's not only that the press is in search of truths and Trump is a fount of lies, which makes them natural adversaries, but attacking the media, or anyone else for that matter, provides a distraction from what else he's doing. And the attacks, like a barrage of lies and self-contradictions, have an even more toxic effect," said Roger Cohn. "This is how autocrats, or would-be autocrats, cement their power. They wear you down with their lies. They distract you. They want you to believe that 2 + 2 = 5. They want you to forget that freedom withers when the distinction between truth and falsehood dies. In a dictatorship, there's a single fount of truth, the voice of the dictator. Trump has one fundamental talent, a ruthless ability to mess with people's minds and turn their anger into the engine of his ambition." Commager wrote in 1972, "When totalitarian regimes invented the technique of the big lie, this Nixon administration has developed a more effective technique, that of lies so innumerable," this is Nixon we're talking about, "that no one can keep up with them, so insolent that they confound refutation, and so shameless that in time they benumb the moral sensibilities of the American people." This doubling down in the face of conflicting evidence to reduce the discomfort of cognitive dissonance is how people convince themselves, or remain convinced, of what they want to believe, wrote Julie Beck in The Atlantic. They seek out agreeable information and learn it more easily, and they avoid, ignore, devalue, forget, or argue against information that contradicts their beliefs. In these charged situations, people often don't engage with information as information, but as a marker of identity. And an article posted by Matt Burgess talks about the dangers of polarized societies, in which he suggests there's an increased tendency toward political paralysis. Eventually, the stakes get high enough that factions are willing to suspend their democratic instincts, even if they support democracy as an ideal. Because polarization eventually leads to struggles for authoritarian power, winning eventually becomes more important to people than following the truth. Loyalty becomes more important than honesty, and concessions to the other side become seen as weak or counterproductive rather than gracious or magnanimous. So if someone comes across a fake news article supporting the other faction's viewpoint, it's better to share it and score some points against the other side than to fact check it. Democracy is based on citizens behaving as rational humans, but neuroscientists have found that fear in particular causes us to respond irrationally at times. And fear's long been a tool used by politicians and anyone selling anything from mouthwash to insurance. And so, if the Watergate burglary would take place in 2017 or 2016 for that matter, what would it look like? Writes Olivia Ward. The Washington Post would, with its fact-checking unit on fire, as the most progressive media, would be on overdrive. But they would be drowned in a sea of lies, distortions, and legal personal truths. Worse, they would be ignored by a large cohort of voters who get their news from aggregators like Facebook, spend their time in front of reality shows, and avidly scan the bits and bytes of Twitter for news in less than 140 characters. Since most people now get their news on social media, where fact and opinion are whipped often into a frenzy, it's getting harder and harder for all of us to know what's being dished out. Paul Krugman writes, on climate change, influential conservatives have for years clung to what's basically a crazy conspiracy theory, that the overwhelming scientific consensus that the Earth is warming due to greenhouse gas emissions is a hoax, somehow coordinated by thousands of researchers around the world. And at this point, this is effectively the mainstream Republican position. Truth, as something there, something that exists apart from and in possible opposition to political convenience, is no longer part of their philosophical universe. In The Merchants of Doubt, its authors say, doubt works because we think that science provides certainty. So if we lack certainty, we think that science must be faulty or incomplete. Science does not provide proof. It only provides a consensus of experts. And so, as journalists, taught to always remain objective and present balanced stories fair to all sides, there's a danger of false balance. Do we present equally the clear consensus of scientists that human-caused climate destruction is a threat to the planet, and also present the conspiracy theories of climate change deniers, largely funded by the fossil fuel industry? I face this all the time with press releases that I get from those groups. Should every story that mentions evolution present equally creationism as a counterweight? The greatest danger that threatens us, Commager taught us, is neither heterodox nor orthodox thought, but the absence of thought. He wrote, "The story of manipulation of public opinion is a chilling one, for it makes clear that even in a country where all channels of communication are technically open and where the press is as free as it is anywhere in the world, and where the academy and the scientific community are strong and independent, government is still able to influence the flow of news, to withhold or distort facts, and to manipulate public opinion." And I would add, with Fox and Breitbart hard at work, along with a host of other special interest corporate-funded organizations ready to bend truth, there's plenty of manipulation and distortion that's also generated on the outside the government. Back at the Recorder, I was heartened to discover a couple of months ago a group of Leverett residents, after November's election, reaching out across the political divide to their political opposites in rural Kentucky, with a delegation of Trump-supporting coal country folk headed here next weekend for an exchange meant to find common ground through conversation and sharing of cultures. It would be overly simplistic to expect that that meeting will heal our political divisions, and similarly naive for me to think that community journalism, as a means of getting everyone on the same page, literally, can be extrapolated on a national scale. But getting at least out of our silos and bunkers is what I believe it's going to take to help our 236-year-old American experiment survive. In Freedom, Loyalty, Dissent, written when this country was in the grip of McCarthy's Red Scare, Commager railed against the development in this country of the kind of society in which freedom of inquiry does not flourish, in which criticism does not flourish, originality does not flourish. This is no alarmist bugaboo, he said. It is a development already underway. If the commonwealth we cherish is to survive and prosper, we must encourage free enterprise in the intellectual and spiritual realms, as well as the economic. Our responsibility here is immense. If we falter here, if by silencing inquiry and criticism we fall into serious error, the whole of civilization as we know it may go down with us. We must use all our resources and use them wisely. More than 60 years later, with the power of the internet and the history of demagogues like McCarthy to inform us, we might think this is easy stuff, but it ain't. Critical thinking is also essential, especially when information, misinformation, disinformation are right on our fingertips. Having three branches of government for checks and balances and free press as a fourth pillar doesn't diminish the need for a strong foundation, an informed and reason-abled democracy. And so, at the risk of using this lectern to lecture you, as I'm about to end here, but knowing that you, like everyone else, are likely wondering how we can respond to this crisis, I'm going to emphasize the importance of having an informed, discerning citizenry that can separate facts from opinions, truth from half-truths, and outright lies and propaganda. There's so much hyperbole out there from the left as well as the right. So please don't share misinformation. As the Hasidic tale about gossip goes, it's impossible to collect a pillow's worth of feathers after they've been blowing everywhere. We need in this country to support a free press, vocally and financially, whether it's the New York Times, the Washington Post, or the Greenfield Recorder, because the business model, which depends primarily on advertising that's getting diverted to Google and Facebook and other cyber sites, is being severely challenged. And though this may also seem self-serving, we need to recognize the value of having a local news gathering organization which can strengthen community by building understanding of shared issues and bridging divides. Professor Commager warned, freedom of speech and the press are guaranteed in state and federal constitutions now over a century and a half old. It is a sobering fact, however, that each generation has to vindicate these freedoms anew and for itself. Yet this is not wholly a misfortune. Freedoms vindicated anew are more precious than those achieved without effort. And only those who are required to justify freedom can truly understand it. I believe that with the help of a fair, healthy, and free press, we need to work together and try to understand one another, honestly helping each other resolve the critical issues we face, rather than joining in the senseless din of discord. Thank you.